Looking like it's 5 past, Jenny, so it's time.
Super. Well, hi everyone. It's really great to be here at this Women in Construction Summit. I'm Jenny Lane, and I'm here today with my wonderful colleague, Sue Annis. And as you can probably guess from these lovely shirts, we both work for Shell. In fact, we both work for the hugely successful Shell global retail business. And today we wanted to talk to you about the power of relationships, about the importance for us as women to have really good, supportive relationships with other women, and how our working careers in Shell, we think, have been a great example of that. So perhaps short introductions before we kick off. So me. I've worked at Shell for over 20 years, and prior to that in FMCG for Unilever. I read engineering at university before doing an MBA, and I've spent most of my career leading teams in operations and supply chain. I now head up the health and safety function for our global retail business. Well, it's great to be here with this audience of talented women. And of course, I am sitting next to one virtually. So over to you, Sue.
Thanks, Jenny. Yes, so hi. I'm Sue Annis. I joined Shell as an experienced hire in 2012 as the National Sales Manager. It was at a time when we were expanding our footprint in the UK. And after a successful 4 years in the UK business, I then moved into the global team. And I currently work in the retail operational excellence team, supporting our petrol stations across the globe. I've always worked in retail. Prior to joining Shell, I was in sales leadership roles, worked for Vodafone for 15 years, and then also worked for Argos.
So, Sue, perhaps a good starting point here would be to ask you what attracted you to Shell.
Sure, yeah. There's a combination of factors, really. Initially, I saw the role in LinkedIn, and it was the brand that caught my attention. And as I read more about the job advert, I could see it was a role that I could easily transfer my skills. As a working mum, the geographical location was spot on. And then I did more and more research about the business and became more excited, actually. I learned around the scale of our retail business with 45,000 petrol stations across more than 80 countries, and came to realise that actually the retail estate for Shell is bigger than other well-known high street retailers such as Starbucks and McDonald's. I guess the rest, I applied for the role, the rest is history. I'm here, time has flown by. It's hard to think really that 8 years ago, I think, was when we first met, and who would think we're here today talking about the power of relationships.
Sue, I remember when you first joined Shell, when you first joined the UK business, the day you walked into our office in Staines, and I was thinking, wow, she's this super tough, super experienced retail sales exec from Vodafone who knows how to kick ass and get stuff done.
It's really interesting. I never knew that. I'm hoping that your thoughts may have changed a little bit as you've got to know me.
Actually, no, I think I was pretty spot on, except your ability to take people with you is what gets you your amazing results. You are a people person and you really get the power of relationships. So I'm intrigued now. What did you think of me when you first joined the business?
I thought you were cool, calm, very serene, very numerate, as well as really supportive of any ideas. It didn't matter how contentious they were, you always said yes. You found out the way to kind of remove any barriers and to make things happen. And I think likewise, you always saw the importance of building relationships.
That's funny, cool and calm. But despite our different styles, I think we made such a great team. You know, I often reflect, Sue, that, and I'll let us take some credit, you know, we more than doubled the profit from our petrol stations across the UK in those 4 years that we were there, you know, really by working together.
Yeah, I think we do. We make a great team, and we've certainly stayed connected, although we've moved on to other roles. And I think there's still been so many parallels where we've been able to support each other and really made some great changes in the business as a result.
Yeah, I think it could be good to share the project we kicked off when we were in the UK. So you were the national sales manager, and I was the very calm, numerate business development manager. And we created a proposal to upgrade our petrol stations using real-time customer feedback. Do you remember we had a lot of tired service stations at that time and quite limited funds? I think you called it Project Startup. And this is probably the first example when we collaborated, Sue, you know, to make an idea a reality.
Yes, although I must admit I had to change the name from Project Startup as it wasn't quite in keeping with our brand. But yes, we realised that our colleagues, they've historically been very focused on new investments, often looking at construction ideas and site expansions. But I think together we realised the importance of nurturing what we already have. We used that real-time customer feedback to target the investments across the whole of the retail network, investing in what were simple things, retiling the toilets, painting, landscaping, deep cleaning, all the cosmetic things that can quite often get overlooked in any retail business. But I guess from a customer perspective, it's what really makes a difference from their experience when they first drive onto the forecourt.
Yeah, and in the end, they all looked so amazing. I couldn't believe the difference, and all at less than $10,000 per site. So I think probably the very best return of any dollar Shell has ever spent.
Yeah, I always think of it as one of those TV programs, the sort of changing TV programs where someone comes into your house, really limited budget, and then they're going to say that they'll increase the value tenfold, and if you spend it in the right way.
Yeah, exactly. But instead of using a single expert, we used our customer feedback. You know, the VOC, voice of customer, or Tell Shell, real data, real people's feedback, so that we could see what our customers thought was important, not just what we thought was important.
Yeah, I think it's this focus on customers that meant actually when we renamed the project more appropriately, because of that customer centricity, we renamed it as Welcome to Shell. And I think that's what was so powerful, the way that we worked together, bringing different skill sets and different strengths and approaches, and really developing strong relationships along the way. I think using our different skills really made this come to life, and working together is all around leveraging those different strengths. I think what came out of this project was not only a fantastic business result, but was also a really good friendship.
I so agree. And that was quite a few years ago when we were both in the UK retail business. And now we've both had our promotions and we are in global roles. But I think, so we both have this passion for the customer and for customer focused data, you know, real evidence, not that subjective who shouts loudest approach to decision making.
Yeah, and I think more recently, I think that was especially important throughout, and even now with COVID-19. In fact, COVID, when that's sort of our conversations or our paths crossed again in earlier this year with COVID-19 in March.
Yeah. I think I started as global health and safety manager for the global business in retail in February. And then almost immediately we were plunged into the global pandemic. And you were in your role as global operations manager in the Ops Excellence team. And we faced so many challenges at the start. And I have to admit, it wasn't easy.
Yeah, there were loads of questions from different countries in the retail business, and they needed answers, they needed support, they needed help. They were really similar questions and yet different enough in each country that really it wasn't a one-size-fits-all approach. And I think that's when we decided that really the best way to address this was through dialogue. And we started the global COVID sharing calls, and we had over 200 people dial in every day. Colleagues from across the retail businesses sharing all over the world. And we saw each country sharing their best practices, their challenges and their learnings, and giving collective inputs. And I think for us, that enabled us to act fast and ensured that we were able to put the health and safety of our people and customers first, and really demonstrated care and respect for our people.
Yeah, and we should be so proud of those calls, and they were incredibly successful. I think it was the learning from the countries hit first, how they were overcoming the challenges with their creative approaches. You know, it was so valuable to those markets, those countries that were further behind in the COVID wave.
Yeah, I think at first, if you remember, it was China. They were sharing the most. They'd certainly been going through COVID for some weeks before we started these calls. And they shared their learnings with the rest of us around the world.
Yeah, China was superb, weren't they? So helpful. And then, yes, of course, each country started to share their own challenges and how they'd overcome them. And we facilitated those great Q&As in the second half of the call. Do you remember? We saw each country sharing how they were managing their challenges safely. And I remember, as an example, the Philippines teams talking about how they were providing sanitized minibuses for service station workers to get them to work.
Yeah, I think it was Philippines as well in the early days. They designed the plexiglass screens for our counters. It's a really simple design, and we shared that globally. There was also the rollout of on-demand delivery for groceries and food items. And we managed to roll that out to more than 18 countries for food home delivery when people were challenged and in isolation. And one of the things I think I was most proud of in those calls, we facilitated a community-based initiative where we were donating food, free food and drinks and fuel and care packages to the key workers. So whether that was people working for the health services or ambulance services or delivery truck drivers delivering supplies. And we donated well over 2 million items of free food and coffee and packages.
Yeah, and all the time, of course, keeping over 99% of our locations open safely, you know, so that as part of that critical infrastructure, we could continue to serve customers, you know, including those key workers, delivery drivers, and the emergency services during what was such a challenging time, and still is for so many people. And I think, you know, there were so many great examples like that, where the virtual environment, you know, connecting real time globally every day was just so valuable to get things done. But I do think at a personal level, of course, it's also brought its obvious challenges. You know, I think building relationships and networking is not as easy as it may have been before. And asking for help isn't easy. There's no one now to see who's struggling in the office or out on site. And it's tough for so many people right now, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think mental health is an important part of our role. We both lead large global teams, and this power of relationships is really key. I think the advice I would give to everyone is the importance of keeping connected, keeping the dialogues going with your teams, having virtual coffees with not only your team, but your business partners, checking in regularly, again, not only on a work front, but on a personal front as well, to see that they're okay. I think it's important to also realise it's okay not to be okay. And especially during these times of COVID, many people have got additional responsibilities on the home front, whether that's something like homeschooling, caring for dependents, just general worries, all of which are in addition to the work activities. I think I'm really starting to try and get the best and leverage digital technology as well. Video calling, as we're doing today, the power of seeing someone's face, whether that's on a one-to-one or during team calls, just really enables a more personal connection for those that might be feeling very isolated or anxious.
Yeah, I do think as well a key step that the Shell Group has taken this year is to bring human performance principles into our business. So, you know, recognizing that everyone makes mistakes, you know, blame fixes nothing. And we really have to learn from each other, you know, adopt a learner mindset. And I think that's exactly what we did during COVID, which links, of course, directly back to mental health, sharing, being open, feeling safe.
Mm. So I'm going to ask you, Jenny, for a bit of advice here. What advice would you give a woman starting out on her career today?
Actually, that's for me, that's easy. Marry well. And I'm deadly serious. I think it's really hard, especially when you have a family. You absolutely need someone who's up for having a partner who has a role as demanding as theirs.
Mm. I agree. I often say, actually, they should teach this at school about how to choose your future partner. And in fact, last week I was on a seminar where I heard someone share that your partner is your glass ceiling, which I thought was a really interesting perspective.
Yeah, your partner is your glass ceiling. I really like that, Sue. So, Sue, what's your one piece of advice to a woman starting her career?
So I think it's around having the courage to change, act. If you're not happy, whether that be at home or in the workplace, you know, take action and be your own change agent, make it happen.
Yeah, I think that really is brilliant advice at home and in work. And I've always felt valued in Shell. I think we both felt immensely valued by Shell. And that's actually what makes the difference. So I think if, as women, we follow through on both our pieces of advice, we really will speed up the progress and see more women at the most senior levels.
Mm. I think it's great when we do see women in leadership roles. If I think for ourselves, you know, our country chair, Sinead Lynch, in our UK business, she's been doing many talks, not only internally, but externally as well, all about sort of empowering women in the workplace.
Yeah, she is brilliant. And of course, it's okay for us to admit that, like other places, you know, we still have a way to go. So whilst preparing for today, we both asked ourselves, what advice would we give to our 25-year-old selves? And if I start mine, it would be, number one, say yes to the opportunities that scare you. Say yes to those. Be confident. And if you aren't confident, look confident. And remind yourself, if I'm in the room, I deserve to be in the room. I deserve to be here. And the other one I would say is don't rush your introduction. You are your own brand, and make the most of your airtime.
That's great. I think my key learnings, and I wish I was 25 again, but my key learnings would be always keep your CV and your connections fresh. As I mentioned earlier, LinkedIn is where I found this role. Although I do really believe in the saying, you know, it's not what you know often, but who you know that can really make the difference, and that's what matters. So it's such a true saying. I mentor a number of people both within the business and outside of Shell. I'm also a trustee on a charitable board, as I really believe in giving back and paying it forward. Massive believer in, you know, people don't always remember what you did, and I think this is a well-known saying, but they'll certainly remember how you made them feel. So yeah.
You know, as ever, Sue, you find the perfect note to end on. Thank you. I think we both agree it's been fantastic to speak to all of you, share some of our thoughts. And so please now do ask any questions in the chat box function or wherever. And we have our wonderful colleague, Nikki, who will read them out so that we can answer any of them live.
Great, that was a great session. Good tips, Jenny, marry well. I'll be sure to keep that one in mind. So we've got 5 questions in the chat box. I'll start in order. So the first one is, what challenges have you found being a woman and building relationships in a male-dominated industry?
Oh, Sue, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, so certainly I've always worked in a male-dominated industry. I mentioned I'd worked for Vodafone Telecoms through kind of its big boom and then sort of market saturation. It certainly was very male-dominated. From a personal front, I don't. In a way, I don't see myself any different. I just see myself as part of the team. But I have experienced. I think one of the challenges is this piece around. You at times you can be judged differently to men. You know, assertive or confidence is something positive quite often for men in the workplace, but as women, then you could be seen to be aggressive. So there's a bit of a double standard there. That can be a bit of a challenge. I think that's also why it led me. I'm fascinated by what motivates people and what their driving forces and the reasons of why they think or act. And so I actually a number of years ago also studied neuro-linguistic practitioning. Just the big thing for me is always respect the map of their world. Just put yourself in their position. Why are they saying that? What are they doing? And just I think this is this people element of just really having a different perspective and trying to understand why maybe some people are acting differently towards you. But yeah, so I think that's probably the one challenge. Are acting differently towards you. But yeah, so I think that's probably the one challenge I can think straight away, just about potentially by some being judged differently. Jenny, I don't know if you've come across any challenges. I know you've been with Shell for a lot longer than myself in oil and gas.
I think it's a really great question, actually, because I think there are some probably quite subtle challenges in the office environment, and it was probably worse actually when I started. I think it's got better, possibly because there are more women around now as well, which helps. Yeah, I think it. If I think about the scenarios where you'd have a group of guys going for a drink after work, and it was always just a little bit harder to be part of that. So that's probably something you don't want to get in their way. You know, they want to go for a drink, and they'll ask you if you want to go, but you're thinking, do they really want me to come along? But actually, as soon as you're not the only woman, actually, that sort of changes. I think it's a lot easier now when there are more women around. You don't tend to get that in the same way.
It's interesting you say about conversations. I'm certainly not a football fan, and quite often conversation can go towards football. I remember vividly an evening meal, so several days meeting, and one of the VPs was talking about cars. I was sat next to him, and he actually apologised. Sorry, Sue, we're talking about cars. You're probably not very interested. Well, actually, here's my car, which happened to be a very lovely car at the time. Showed him a picture and kind of top trumps him, which I was quite pleased with, because I just sort of reframed his perception that I might not be interested in cars because I was female. So yeah, challenge back, push back, change that perception.
Love that. Really good answers, guys. There's quite a few questions coming through now. The next one is, how do you build new relationships virtually?
yeah, in COVID, that's really tough. I've got 2 new team members who started on the 1st of July, one in Manila and one in Krakow in Poland, and I've not met them in person yet. So that is really hard when you have a new starter. You want it to be an engaging and a warm feeling, and normally I would want to meet them in person, but the whole recruitment process, their whole onboarding has all been done virtually. I think it is around regular contact, using video, and giving space for discussion, not just on the work front. So I'll always check in first with them on a personal front before I move to business. The other thing I've done as well, I've noticed a real change. In the office, you're very used to being able to have chats at the coffee machine and just general social catch-ups with people that you might not have a real need to talk to them every single day. And so recently I've started scheduling on every Friday. I'll pick someone who I haven't spoken to for a while, haven't connected, and I just will put half hour in their diary and just say, haven't spoken to you for a while, just want to connect, nothing business, just connecting on a personal front. And it's a really nice way actually for me to end the week as well. On a Friday afternoon, I'll have a cup of coffee and a virtual catch up with people that I see in the office, but I haven't spoken to for over 6 months. So Jenny, I don't know. Sorry.
I think they're great tips. So I would say the same, is just to have that confidence to put time in for the softer catch up with people, and just try and make the effort to do that and find the time in what is very often for all of us a really busy day. Otherwise it can just become very functional. I think the word I would use is you have to be quite deliberate about putting the relationship building time back into your day when it's more natural in the office environment.
Completely agree. I'm sure everyone can find we're more busy now that we're working from home.
Yes.
Next question. Do you have any advice regarding working with someone with a diametrically different point of view? So particularly someone who is inflexible in their perspectives. Bit of a hard one.
So, another great question. These things are easy to say, how to do. We've all been there, where it can feel like the relationship's quite different. I would say this sounds quite a soft approach, but I would say look for it's a bit like the conversation we just had actually. Look for the softer elements in that relationship. Yeah, so when you say a different approach, then you're probably in a functional space. So look for your connectivity at a personal level, if that's possible. And I'm going to say reach out, think about the humanity between the two of you. But, what do you have in common? How can you start to build that softer relationship? And then the diametrically opposed, the sort of functional work piece is easier to work through because you respect each other and you have a working relationship. I have to say, Sue and I did not agree on everything, and as we sort of tried to touch on at the start, we are quite different people in our approach in a number of different ways, key ways in the way we approach things. But I think it's sort of having the maturity to connect on a personal level and really try and step into other people's shoes, to have that empathy and understanding where they're coming from. But it's not easy.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that, and I'd add, sometimes if you have a very different perspective, it can be quite a challenging working relationship with that individual, and you can find yourself subconsciously and inadvertently reacting differently to that individual. So I actually check myself in sometimes if you have a bit of a strained relationship because those views are so polar opposite. And before I reply, certainly on email, I'll check myself in, and I just think, well, who's someone that I've got such a great working relationship with? How would I respond if it was that person that I was replying to? And imagine that I'm replying to that person so that emotions don't come into it. The other thing I think is, if a view of an email is bouncing back more than twice, I pick up the phone. I think emails going backwards and forwards with very different views and perspectives, the best way is to speak to each other. There's compromise, there's collaboration, there's co-creation. I know they're all buzzwords, but you don't get that on email. So I think if you are working with someone who's very different to you, has different views, just thinking around how you respond, how you react, and what method you use. And I think voice is always better in those situations, because then you don't have, there's less likely for misunderstanding, which is so easy on email.
Right. I think we have 1 minute left and two very good questions and very different questions. So one of the questions
we can try
is
and
around
answer offline as well, if that helps.
Yeah. So there's one question around what Shell is doing now to get ahead of the curve as less vehicles use fossil fuels. You definitely won't be able to answer that in a minute, so we can pick up with that offline. But the last one I'd like to end on is, Sue, on your LinkedIn, someone has seen that you have hypnosis skills. Have you used these at work?
On me, yes. Very good. Yeah. Very good at it.
I think there's a few people I might want to, but no, I haven't. So yeah, so the NLP, that is all around, so yeah, the sort of, as I mentioned earlier, neuro-linguistic programming. It's around sort of, cognitive behavioural therapy, understanding people's emotions and behaviours. So it's a fascinating subject, but no, I haven't put anyone into a trial. I might have sent a few people asleep, but not hypnosis. Yeah. It's probably not a good end, that, is it, about putting people to sleep? So yeah, but yeah.
I think it's great, so. Thank you.
So I think we are at time now, but what we would love to do is the questions we maybe haven't been able to answer is see if we can